Welcome to everybody.
We got now the link that we are online.
We are online, and we are glad to welcome you all. Welcome to everybody. Ich muss das mal stumm schalten da. So, welcome to everybody for the third edition of our new Bauhaus City Dialogues. Today we are very glad to welcome Alma Sarmiento and Torange Khonsari. That it's a pleasure to have you with us. And well, this new Bauhaus City Dialogues now refer to the initiative of the new European Bauhaus that has been started by politics in Brussels. And but let's say really many people and many organizations in Europe respond to this initiative, what shows really an interest and I think also a need to combine sustainability with social questions and with cultural questions. That's maybe the main issue we want to target with these dialogues, that in specifically address city and also, let's say, not only metropolis, but also smaller and other forms of living places, and to discuss about their future. That's the general idea of this series. And well, now I hand over to Ricarda and to Alyssa to give some more details for the session of today.
Yes, also from my side, many welcome to everybody, and many thanks for joining our two guests. And yeah, maybe to expand a little bit the idea of the dialogue that we want to start a discussion and expand the discourse on urbanism. And today we have the topic of urbanism and creativity, which Alyssa will introduce a bit more later. And yeah, it's like a lecture series that we invented in connection with the course we are doing with the master students this semester. It's also called the New Bauhaus City. And there we try to develop new ideas for places outside of metropolis in connection to this new European initiative. And the idea of the dialogues is really to invite people also outside of the discipline and to start this somehow a dialogue in between people coming from urbanism and architecture and from other disciplines. And it's a kind of a double dialogue. So we always invite two people to discuss and to present also their work. And it's also a dialogue with the students that take part in this master course that we are doing, who will later start the discussion with some questions for you. And yeah, we are looking really forward to this. And maybe to start, we would like to introduce you, the two guests. So Alyssa, would you start?
Okay, yeah.
Yes.
Then, thank you, Ricarda. And well, I'm very glad that we have the pleasure today to have Alma Sarmiento here live from Bogota. And we have a cooperation with the university where she's working, which is the Universidad del Rosario. And Alma is a senior lecturer at the brand new Faculty of Creation, the FACCREA, of this university, where they intend to work together with several creative disciplines. So she is absolutely perfect expert for the discussion today. Alma is a coordinator and lecturer there at the basic cycle of architecture, arts and design program, and among other academic and administrative functions she's fulfilling there. She is a visual artist and has a master and PhD in art from the Sorbonne University in Paris. And her creative work has focused on work in general has been focused on bringing together and weaving creations between creation and research. And she's mainly interested in proposing experimental methodologies in relation to modes of expression of time. It's registration visualization, where she articulates issues related to different systems of practices and collage, of relationships in collage. Time and writing. Her creative work explores various media practices and, among others, artists' books, our work on archive, collage, video, and embroidery, which I think are many and very interesting in complementing disciplines. For more than a decade, she's participating in publications, conferences, collective and individual exhibitions in Colombia and France. And she has also participated in the coordination and promotion of different cultural and pedagogical projects. I'm very glad and very interested in, and very curious about the presentation we'll have today and the discussions that will hopefully follow. Welcome, Alma.
Yes. Yes, and also many welcome to Torange Khonsari, live from London, moving from Bogota to London and Hanover, of course. And you also work in between different areas, also creation and research, but especially also in between academia and the practical field of, in between urbanism and artistic practices. Which also leads to exploratory approaches that I think connect well to our topic today, urbanism and creativity. And Torange is architect and senior lecturer at London Metropolitan University since in the year 2000. She is also co-founder and director of Public Works, which I explain in a bit, and a visiting lecturer at artistic practices. Which also leads to exploratory approaches that I think connect well to our topic today, urbanism and creativity. And Torange is architect and senior lecturer at London Metropolitan University since in the year 2000. She is also co-founder and director of Public Works, which I explain in a bit, a visiting lecturer at artistic practices. Which also leads to exploratory approaches that I think connect well to our topic today, urbanism and creativity. And Torange is architect and senior lecturer at London Metropolitan University since in the year 2000. She is also co-founder and director of Public Works, which I explain in a bit, a visiting lecturer at artistic practices. Which also leads to exploratory approaches that I think connect well to our topic today, urbanism and creativity. And Torange is architect and senior lecturer at London Metropolitan University since in the year 2000. She is also co-founder and director.
Sorry, what is happening?
A visiting lecturer at I don't know. Sorry.
It keeps repeating.
Yeah. Maybe you can turn off the sound, please.
Yes, I got it. Wait.
Annette Haas, can you please turn off the audio?
Okay, sorry for this.
It was kind of collage starting.
Yes, so, okay, sorry, Torange, that was not the plan. Okay, so yes, again, back to where we stopped. So you're director of Public Works, and that is a not-for-profit critical design practice founded in 2004. And you work a lot on citizen-driven development, civic learning, and redesign structures in the city through practices of involvement and collective action. And what I also found very interesting in relation today is that you work a lot on outputs that are more connected to events, researching campaigns, urban strategies, and participatory art and architecture, not so much to objects themselves or buildings themselves, but much more also the wider view. And I also wanted to mention that you have lectured at various international conferences, among them also the UN Habitat, and have also done many international workshops, where I wanted to name again the Civic University that is actually where I found Public Works and where I got to know you, and where you presented also ideas of creating civic learning opportunities and spaces for people to meet. And yes, many welcomes, and thanks for joining today. And yes, we thought that maybe Alma would start the presentation then you go, and then we come together for the discussion if it's fine.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Should I?
Sorry,
Should I just
one thing. Yes.
a short overview. After all these yes, technical surprises. Yes, I just quickly don't want to like stop it any longer. Just to give also again some keywords and ideas what for the discussion that will follow and possible ideas. That today we talk about artistic research, what it means, the terms of subjectivity and intersubjectivity, explorative approaches in research and creative works and experimental works, inductive thinking and researching, inventive methods, cross-disciplinary thinking and working, and above all, I think it's about open questions. And now, yes, the stage is yours, Alma. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Thank you, Ricarda and Jörg. Can I share screen?
Yes, go for it.
Thank you. Is it okay?
Yes, it works perfectly.
Well, so hello to everyone. Heartfelt greetings to all of you. Thank you very much for this invitation. I'm very happy to be here with you today to dialogue and share your experiences about art and urbanism. I'm going to talk about my artwork and in particular my doctoral dissertation, which is titled, as you see here, Collage and Time, Uchronia and Alternative Histories, Research and Creation of Atemporal Models and Other Systems of Relationship between Writing and Collage. My dissertation in fine arts deals with the fields of research and creation, a place where creation is understood as research and vice versa, of which you could say is an attempt to see the field of knowledge as a transversal category without hierarchies, as a dimension that is both creative and sensible, from which arise hybrid and multidisciplinary methodologies. Let's begin with a few words about my artistic practices. Alisa already said some words, but I'm going to show you just quickly. I work with found images taken from any number of sources. My work almost never attempts to illustrate preconceived ideas. I establish a dialogue with images because perhaps the images know more about us than we do about them. I create with this dialogue primarily through the use of collage, but also using video, embroidery, occasionally drawing, as well as academic research. Through this dialogue, I learn things that perhaps I already knew, but had ignored. I also unlearn, allowing new errors to appear, which creates an uncertainty principle, which builds knowledge. My sustained work in collage has taught me to take the sense of things and turn it on its head, playing with the possible paradoxes of sense and also of nonsense. Collage permits the peaceful coexistence of contradictions and ideas that a priori were not meant to be found. From my point of view, this is beautiful and revolutionary. That is how I have erected collage as a heroic, absolute, timeless, fragile, and wild system of thought, as carefree as the idea of childhood, and capable of introducing re-semanticizations at all levels of knowledge and sensibility. The most subtle and delicate lesson collage has given me is without a doubt its capacity to play with temporality. Collage has the ability to not only permit the peaceful coexistence of contrary ideas, but also allows, within the same time and space, the existence of distant heterogeneous temporalities. Through this carnival of multiple temporal layers, collage teaches us to let go of concepts like continuity, linearity, and homogeneity that are generally attributed to the concept of time. Thus, my dissertation proposes to outline a tour of time using collage based on 3 levels of temporal structuring: historical time, lived or biographical time, and the time of creation. These 3 axes always go hand in hand with collage and imagining the possibilities of an experimental methodology that questions the temporal architecture of Western civilization, where fertile lessons can arise in alternatives for the constitution and organization of knowledge and sensibility. From these theories, a skeptical attitude towards history was born, in particular toward the history of art. Thus, I propose in the first part of my dissertation a sort of counter-history of the collage, seeking to open up the chronologies of modern collage and to revalue popular collagist activity, which are undervalued in most authoritative accounts despite their founding role. Here, I won't dwell on this aspect. Above all, I want to focus on 2 projects I used in my dissertation. Here we can see some images from the first of these 2 projects, the book or Atlas of Seconds, the first volume of an encyclopedia of time and collage, which was recently published in an abridged version under the auspices of the Saloon of Colombian Artists in 2019. The book compiles reflections on imaginary solutions with regard to time in today's fast-paced Western societies, where it is common to feel that we do not even have the time to think about time. It seems we have lost our temporal reference points and that time is like an animal on the verge of extinction. The metaphors regarding time's obsolescence are vast. We speak, for example, of a famine of time as if it were a vital resource or an energy-producing raw material like oil. Those who possess this resource are saved, the rest are doomed to be castaways in the whirlwinds of globalization and its byproducts like internet, high-speed transport, neo-capitalist politics, etc. Voices of protest are not lacking in the arts. For example, the question of time has always been very much alive and criticisms over the civilization of the clock proliferate. Collage as the technique and the main character of the Atlas of Seconds is presented here as a medium that can teach time to unlearn itself. As I mentioned earlier, I start from the hypothesis that collage is a system of thought where heterogeneous temporalities can coexist. It is also understood in the Atlas as an ungrammatical language, a creative syntax of discontinuity that invents dynamic temporal models. As for the second, adult to the title, they are a continuation of a text I wrote in 2011, the Atlas or Book of Minutes, a parody of, and at the same time, an homage to the books of hours from the Middle Ages, illuminated manuscripts, novels commissioned in order to have a kind of instruction manual on the management of their daily time with respect to liturgical time. And that Atlas of Seconds, a hybrid book composed of second-hand things, was above all conceived as a visual form and an instruction manual for the writing of my dissertation. This project functions as an inverted reflection or reverse of my dissertation. It reveals the seams of academic research and introduces through that plot schemes that blur pre-established forms in the construction of knowledge. The name Atlas supports that intention, in addition to the Greek Titan Atlas who holds up the entire earth. In this case, what is more significant in its derivation into a, is its derivation into a manual of movable plates that represents maps or contain images that accompany another volume. These aspects clearly resonate with Abi Warburg, historian and, if we may say, collagist of Western culture and its images, creator of the famous Atlas Mnemosyne, whose shifting and provisional principles inexhaustibly show and teach us new relationships between things and words. Taken as concepts, And as means of creation, collage and time are also found in this atlas and in my dissertation to awaken archaeologies of the book, or primitive forms that refer to a kind of original book, which also allude to the epic and nursery rhymes, a space where the modalities of the expression of time, like writing, adding, singing, reciting, counting, and add to that list the modality of collaging, would not yet be dissociated. Among these primitive forms of the book, there are also the handwritten encyclopedias that around the 13th century collected quotations from various sources. They were associated with miniature libraries that were often called florilegios, from the Latin flos, comes from flower, and legere, to choose, due to their compilatory character. So the precious quotes were meticulously copied and thought of as carefully picked flowers. Thus, the first of this encyclopedic project brings together a crazy constellation of picket flowers or notions, knowledge and characters, real or imaginary, that explain time, the most common of fictions, as the writer Véronique Leroux says. And some of the characters in this constellation book postulate themselves as prophets of the absurd or visionaries of time, giving themselves the right to reinterpret it, taking language to critical points, or recomposing and inverting its order, placing the future behind, for example, an aspect I will discuss later in relation to the second project in my dissertation. The pages of the atlas operate as if they were the printing plates of the atlases previously mentioned. These plates are mobile and have no predetermined order. There is no fixed index. The reader is invited to construct and invent his or her own reading connections, and thus to practice a form of montage or editing. Some of the images, collages, and texts occasionally include threads and are often constructed with visible and brightly colored sticky tape. So I have considered calling this collage scotchage also. Among many reasons, the use of tape is intended to draw attention to the process of making the collage and to emphasize their capacity to join things that a priori are not united, to potentially join all things in time and space, in this case within the space of a book atlas or of an autonomous spatio-temporal sequence, as the artist Ulises Carrion would said. In sum, this atlas book, full of intentions and desires, tried to configure a machine that explores time in order to defamiliarize us from time, and also to defuturize the anxiety about the time to come, or as Nietzsche said, to act against time, over time, and in favor of a time to come. Certainly, this objective represents the work of lifetime, and it is not possible to put everything into a single book, like the poet Stéphane Mallarmé wanted to do in his impossible and unfinished project, The Total Book, which should include all of reality, all of literature. So I pass to the second project of my doctoral research, titled 2066, is somehow articulated with this desire to search for the possibilities of a total book, or as I mentioned previously, a kind of original book where the forms of expressing time would not be yet dissociated, like singing, reciting, telling, writing. From this archaeological search for the book in the Atlas of Seconds, we thus pass in 2066 to another possibility of archaeology, but of the present, and following Giorgio Agamben and his idea of returning to a present where we have never been. The archaeology of the present is manifested in this project through the time of speech and points to the desire to exaggerate the possibilities of different temporal oxymorons and presents itself as a science fiction mockumentary. This mockumentary, or science fiction auto-ethnofiction, brings together a polyphony of voices through video interviews conducted with Colombian artists dressed up in their version of an octogenarian of the future. And they speak and reflect on the beginning of the 21st century from the year 2066. And the young woman who's lost in the order of time interrogates them to reconstruct that distant era at the beginning of the 21st century, whose traces have nearly disappeared for her. Here you see some artists putting on makeup. So it employs a classic science fiction exercise, an estrangement from the present, where the present is understood to be the remote past of a distant future. I explore the theme of the future from the intersection of three axes. The first, the possibility of imagining a future that already happened and can therefore be rewritten following the lessons of temporality in Uchronia and inspired by the philosophical reflections on history by Charles Renouvier, who coined the neologism in his book Uchronia, Utopia in History, an apocryphal sketch of the development of European civilization, not as it was, but as it might have been, and published in 1857. Renouvier imagined a world in which Catholicism, present only in the East, enters the West in the form of a pacifist sect. Above all, let us remember that this Uchronia is an original philosophical reflection on history without any revisionism, which does not intend to deceive the reader. It is rather an educational exercise enlightened by free will. Another aspect of 2066 alludes to time from linguistics and the conception of time in the Aymara language, where the future is behind us and the past in front of us, as evinced by the word naira, which means I in front view and past, and the word kipa, which means behind and future. And the last reference comes from the French philosopher Élie Düring and his book, The Future Does Not Exist, Le Futur n'existe pas, in French, published in French, where he proposes that the future that exists are the futures of the past, all those things that did not come true and whose futuristic rays nourish the heart of the present unceasingly. Thus, fascinated and interested in crossing these conceptions of time and exaggerating the confusion of temporalities, in this project, I wanted to imagine a Uchronia of the future, that is, to apply a utopia to the future as if it had already happened and rewrite it in order to conjure it. The year 2066 coincides with the octogenarian age of the interviewees participating in the project and highlights the questions of a generation originally from Latin America continent, which marks both the end of utopian ideologies and the beginning of ecological disaster. They are also the last generation to have grown up in a pre-internet era. The interviews show mental images and the emergence of tangled narratives that mix intuitions of all times and that somehow encourages a pathological self-reflectivity, as Élie Düring says, which for him is the flip side of the atrophy of the utopian imagination. It is a matter, in short, of dramatizing our inability to imagine the future through variations of what is possible, of the possible, mobilizing, if necessary, the resources of Uchronian conjectural history. As you can see, and by way of arriving at the conclusion of this presentation, in the marriage between time and collage, I tried to define in my dissertation, the question of the writing of history became an important problematic. Perhaps you may wonder at this point why collage is related to this problem of history and Uchronia. Well, within collage, all kinds of elements and archives from different temporalities may coexist. An image from 1909, another from 1976, another from 2010 can all meet up in a collage and form a new totality where several pieces of the past are shown in front of our eyes. The past in front of us, as expressed in Aymara. Of course, it happened with any kind of images, but collage disorganizes and organizes the scraps or fragments of the events that are embodied in these archives. Thus, collage evinces and highlights the diachronic flavor. It means everything that changes through time of those fragments and reveals to us both the physical and poetic existence of history. Collage creates a space in which different readings of the possible worlds symbolized in those archives and fragments of images can be confronted. And in this sense, it relates to Uchronia and its capacity to perform laboratory experiments with the material of history itself. Perhaps the urbanists and architects among you are asking, what does the space that collage creates look like, or where is that space really in all these stories? Well, one of the most exciting aspects of collage resides in the intertwining of time and space within inexhaustible and fertile strategies. As you know, at the beginning of the 20th century, collage landed in the Western art world and as a kind of hero who dethroned perspective and inaugurated a new revolutionary optical system, liberating the forms and space of art, emancipating them by redefining the boundaries of aesthetics, inviting all kinds of heteroclite elements of everyday life to participate in a creative composition. It was a revolution, the invention of a new pictorial syntax, of a new language. It became a new machine for seeing, a spatial insurrection where the naked beauty of things sprouts, emerges, and with it a new space is born, a discontinuous, aerial, free, vast, extensive, inexhaustible space. So, if we think of reinventing forms of human space, new Bauhaus city, perhaps the practice of collage can be a liberating practice to unlock the world and expose it to new enigmas, as the historian Florian Rodari says. And on that note, I conclude this brief presentation of my work. I hope that it has resonated with your own research in some way. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Alma. I think this was really great. And already through your lecture, we found, I guess, many parallel working fields and also interests. Creating future with the past, I think, is a very interesting quote, and also the capacity to play with temporality and yeah, how you find something in the in-between that is not formulated directly. I would pass the word now to Turanga, and then we come back later to talk together.
Hi, everyone.
Hi.
Thank you so much. That was a wonderful presentation. I love collage, and weirdly, I have one kind of reference, although I could talk about it much more with you, Alma. So I'll share my screen, and I'm actually going to talk about Ricardo talked about the school, the Civic University, and weirdly, I am talking about that today, but I'm going to start to frame it initially through my current research, which is around the notion of cultural commons. And I'll describe that in a minute, but I just want to say, in terms of the whole Bauhaus spirit, that we always felt slightly that we didn't fit. We didn't fit in architecture, we didn't fit in art, we didn't fit in urbanism, and we were always a misfit. And although that might conceptually sound exciting, it's a very lonely place. So I started to, through my PhD, I started to find was the notion of commons, which started to not really define anything through disciplinary boundaries, but through the concept of common good, which I'll describe here. So the commons are a form of practice, actually, which are about embedding care. It's about horizontal social relationships. It's about common good created from the ground up by a set community. And I won't go into all the different kind of terminologies of common good. It's a massive philosophical topic. But what economist Kate Raworth talked about in her Donut Economics was that actually we need all these forms of good, not for one to have hegemony over another, but that for all of them to work together. So private good, which is within the markets, it's what you commercially kind of distribute for money. Common good, which is created, which is in the world of the community, it's in the realm of the community, and is created from the ground up by a community for their needs and requirements. And the public good, which is mainly should be stewarded by the state, and it's the good for a bigger crowd of us all as a nation, as a public, and so on. And the thing is that the common good and the public good constantly get interchanged, and they don't have the precision of how different they are. And in that situation, they can get manipulated and they can get co-opted and they can kind of be described as one or the other. And I suppose what I've been trying to argue is that actually they need to be distinct and developed distinctly as their own kind of logic in relation to the others, not exclusively on their own. And so this kind of form of practice, the commons practice as a cultural practice, then they start to create this, what John Holloway talks about, cracks in capitalism, or cracks in the system. And it is through these cracks and occupying these cracks that we can kind of either open up new spaces in a more stealth way than a violent way that a revolution might be. And slowly you start to shift culture and you start to change things. And that really needs designing, that those practices, it's not, a lot of people think, oh, we design, yeah, we have an organizational design, we have a legal structure and a constitution and our policies, as if that's enough. It's a design process, it's an art form. And I think, not that I think, there are lots of pieces written about organizational aesthetic and the beauty of organizations, be it social movements as organizations or cultural practices, art practices, and so on. But I won't again go into this in too much, because maybe we'll talk about that through the School for Civic Action. So because we are a community-based, community-engaged, participatory art, architecture, and design practice, if you like, we've been embedded in neighborhoods for, I don't know, since 2000, for 20 years now. And we always realized that there was learning and knowledge in communities, that one learning that was needed, that nobody was aware that was needed, knowledge that was local, that also people just did not appreciate because there were stories or narratives or things that people did through their everyday lives, but they actually changed something, and they changed the way the city operated. But because there weren't sanctions as expert knowledge, then they were never taken seriously. So the School for Civic Action really started as a way to promote local knowledge and to see how to make beautiful social organizations or community organizations that didn't have conflict with each other or compete with each other, but actually started to have social solidarity and work together. And we started it really as a pilot in working with a local authority, Brent Council in London, with our students in the Royal College of Art, where we started to create a situated classroom in the city, being situated, almost becoming, I don't know, students and educators and residents. And people would pop in, they would kind of tell you what knowledge they had, or they wouldn't see it as knowledge, they would just be telling you about the area. And the students use these as a way to kind of develop a program. And this became a really interesting kind of organically developed pilot of what kind of learning was actually happening in the local neighborhoods. And of course, it's informal learning. It's not institutional learning that you have in institutions such as universities or schools. And we realized that there were these kind of different models of learning: observational learning that happens through imitation, incidental learning, which is a byproduct of experience. So you kind of learn things, but you don't even know you're learning it. And it's those kind of incidental and episodic learning that is also, episodic is byproduct of a significant event that happens, that actually forms who you are, forms your beliefs, forms what you like, what you dislike, what you feel is aesthetically pleasing, your taste, you know, all of those things, which in social sciences is called socialization. And then learning through dialogue. And then what we started to do was start to do research in creating an archive of alternative schools and informal schools. There's a lot of art schools which are alternative, but not that many alternative urban schools or alternative architecture schools or design schools, but a huge amount of alternative art schools, which we started to document. There are also schools around ecology and things like that. But what we decided to do was this idea of being embedded in neighborhoods in terms of civic classrooms. So in 3 long-term projects in London, we started to just have these mobile, you know, ad hoc civic classrooms. And they kind of were very events-based. So it wasn't like people come and learn, you know, in a really formal situation. It was, again, that kind of informal learning of storytelling through eating, through events, and so on and so forth. Of course, there were also taught sessions, but I'll come on to that in a minute. And so this kind of idea of a total curriculum, which is in educational theory, is basically a kind of curriculum which, sorry, let's go back. It's a kind of curriculum that it is the whole learning environment. So from, you know, the way you talk to somebody, from what the content is, about how it looks, about the environment within which you are being taught, to how you develop a curriculum, all of that is all kind of developed as a total curriculum. And so we had the opportunity at Tate Modern in the Tate Exchange to start to run the School for Civic Action as a series of different kind of interventions and impromptu, informal sessions and so on. And what kind of analyzing everything that we did quite organically, really using quite a lot of our participatory art practice as a method, we realized that we had these kind of civic classes, which were things like how do you kind of develop an ethics of care in communities, for example, or best practice in models of engagement. And a lot of these had come up with us having observed some really conflictual issues in communities where they're basically fighting for resources. So they start to compete and start to really get into conflicts. And so you start to have, not all communities, but in some where there was a density of community organizations, they a lot of the time became quite charged with conflict. And so there was quite a lot of learning that would be necessary in order for them to see the bigger picture, or how to strategize to grab things that they need, or how to decipher policy, or so those kind of more formal stuff, which is more to do with the civic aspect of how you deal with the institutions. Then prototyping the civic was really us prototyping much more around ecology. For example, how do you create a wall with moss, which is about cleaning air, which then this is a common good, which then, has a public good agenda of clean air. Or so it's kind of lots of prototyping, collaborative making in a way around prototyping that. And then another one, which is neighborhood courses, which is something I really love. And that's the only one I'm going to mainly talk about because we don't have huge amounts of time. And that really is also where through that, you also archive local knowledge and local learning. So this is kind of a method that we started, and that's when you sit down with communities to actually just talk to them about, if you give them this form, they just go, oh, I have no knowledge. But if you're kind of talking and you fill this, and, in terms of their life skills or what civic engagement, and civic engagement, I don't mean like really big stuff. It's like if you took some bollards and closed a street and had a party, that to me is a civic engagement. Or household knowledge, how to wrap a sandwich really well with cling film. I mean, it doesn't have to be like super, knowledge like that. So people just didn't think all of these kind of things that they'd invented really small. So that they were important, and we feel that they are important, and they're important to tell people that they're important. And then it was a really beautiful moment where you then show them this. And they go, wow, really, you think these are important? And you have another dialogue around why, these knowledge are quite unique to those people. And so if you're talking about empowerment, I think that they're kind of just these really small moments where people think that the only important knowledge is expertise or professional knowledge. And then the next step really is about how do you then turn those into little neighborhood courses. So I mean, this one is more kind of feminist anarchist school, which is more somebody who was an activist in a local neighborhood. But you can, there were lots of little things in terms of how do you devise a walk, for example, or how do you plan a walk? Or there was also a lot of things that we had where you would say, oh, so where would I find out more about these walks, for example, or how you created a walk? And they all go like this, like it's all in their head. So you had to bring this stuff out, because with them then moving or not being around anymore, all of that knowledge just disappears again, and then new people come and then they repeat the same thing, and so all of this knowledge never gets accumulated. So this kind of idea of a neighborhood curriculum, which is devised from the ground up, very specific to those neighborhoods and areas, we really enjoy. And then these are kind of more how then. This is when the School for Civic Action was actually a major event, where the learning happened through quite performative ideas. And this was so tea dance is an English tradition, and this was a tea dance with a little bit of knowledge about cookery in the local area. And so it's kind of it was really developing those those ideas. And this is another artist who started a listening booth. So she would just listen and you would just talk. And again, you know, that those listening have now become, she's now part of the School for Civic Action in us developing some of these neighborhood programs through the listening workshops and so on together. And then again, face painting, you know, I don't know if you have that, but it's a big thing in community events. So we kind of took the idea of face painting more as these illustrated tattoos, which then 2 local girls who do face painting in schools, we basically paid them to do that, but always each one of those tattoos were one of these local skills or one of those kind of knowledges that was in the community. So when they were doing your face tattoo to the public, they would tell you that story. So it was kind of a way of transferring that, and then people walked around with people's knowledge, and in a way were this walking archives. And this is the kind of funny collage that is more a performed, I mean, it's quite a lot of work to do these situated images. It's not a collage, it's in real life and it's photographed. But it was a way we always kind of thought, so how do we bring together all these different community groups, all these different narratives within the community, that all of this knowledge that we're talking about that gets hidden or you can't see. And so each one of these are, you know, they're symbols in a way. So if you see the guy holding the solar panel, they have a kind of circular energy company in the local area that they do community energy from the ground up. You know, there's the cafe and a community cafe which is there, and they also the local farm, and so there's kind of lots of these kind of narratives that are then in these what we call situated images, as kind of coming together. But then there was this thing that people started to say, well, how do we show this knowledge? And that was more, so how do we start to accredit this kind of informal knowledge so that people can take it with them, their accreditation? And this is in the form of badges. It's a blockchain. I won't go into it. It's quite complex as a description, but it's a blockchain certification through badges. So on your phone, you have a wallet of all your achievements, and basically you can also have that at the bottom of your email, these badges, and then you click on it and it shows what you've done and what you've achieved. So it can even be a film or whatever, but you get these badges on completion of certain tasks that kind of we put in. And so it's a way to accredit that local knowledge. And my final slide is really about then what I developed. So again, so that is quite an interesting way to develop in a really creative, using quite artistic, creative methods, getting people who would never ever think about going to university because they just don't have that image of themselves, through the neighborhood curriculum and some of those programs that we've just talked about, to actually give them the confidence to then think that they could, if they wanted to, it's something that they could achieve. And so I developed this course called Design for Cultural Commons, which is really about developing practices and organizations which are about creating cultural common goods embedded in neighborhoods and communities, where you don't really need a degree. It's a postgraduate course and you don't need a degree to enter it. You can just prove that you have experience of working in communities. And then I've really seen it as this course is really for me a political project rather than a course, because it's the way it's been designed is to kind of get people to have practices ready to go out and practice the commons and commoning practices in producing common goods. And that crack that I talked about earlier, it's kind of producing organizations that multiply the production of cracks in the system. And then I've designed with the students together, or we're designing it this summer, a kind of guild almost type of association where there could be peer-to-peer support, and me coming in post the course to support again that thing that I talked about earlier in terms of never feeling you belong, or have a support system because you don't belong to a specific discipline, to then kind of develop that further, and have a support system. And because it's interdisciplinary as a course, so, you know, if you have a graphic designer, then you use the commons-based graphic designers rather than somebody who mainly works within the private sector, or if somebody's in fashion or artist or so on. So you kind of create this network, and of course, with anything insular, you have to design the boundary and make sure that the boundary is porous and it's not exclusive. And so there's a lot of design that happens through that, but it's kind of that transition from really grassroots on the ground to almost going up to PhD, really, because this can also be a way, if you really wanted to, over time, to develop it into a PhD. So I think I stopped there.
Great, thank you very much, Torange. I think this was also a really, really nice excursus through the common good as a topic, which I think we will also touch next week with another special guest that we invited, Daniel Allen, but also that you mentioned again the design process really as an art form, and these situated images and collages as informal knowledge creation that you do, which I think connect very well or nicely also to what we heard before. And as well the practice that you have as a method of collaborative making and what this can lead to, this kind of forms of co-creation.
Yeah.
Really nice, thank you. And I would at this point maybe first open the stage to the students who prepared some questions for you. And but before we do this, maybe if you have one question in advance to the other guests, maybe to do this. So Alma to Torange or Torange to Alma, I don't know if you have any open question first.
I just think it was great, your project, Torange. I think it's like a specialization of collage, precisely. I love it.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose I've been, in my research, I've been thinking about collage quite a lot as well. So there's quite a lot of overlaps around, I don't know if this is so much of a question, but it could be a question in terms of, you know, with collage, when you tear, you kind of create a disjunction from one situation and you reconfigure it again in a new imagined way. And I think that's where a lot of kind of crossover across what we're doing is doing, but probably more questions will arise as we continue.
Okay, then I would open the stage for the students, if it's fine.
Yeah, hi everyone. And first we would like to say thank you for the really interesting presentations you just gave us. And our first question addresses you both, because as we researched you and also on the website of Public's Works and the project in there, we noticed that they are all quite different and therefore deal with different questions or tasks. So our question is, how do you choose or find a project you like to work on? And maybe you can go a bit more into detail and just explain to us, how do you start?
Alma, do you want to go first? Or?
Well, yes. So thanks for the question, Medita. Well, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, or as I try to say it, perhaps I don't choose projects, perhaps projects choose me. in a way. There are so many reasons, and perhaps we are always working in the same project who begins to growth and growth and growth, and we just find ways to give a shape to a particular question. But questions also comes in my work, in artwork, from the materials. I make this dialogue with them, and they lead me to many ways. So one form to respond to that dialogue and to open up many other windows is to write a dissertation, to make a book, a project which is very megalomaniac. If you want an encyclopedia or atlas, the language always is trying to find himself in the definitions. And so I don't know if the project choose me or I choose them, but I try to give a form with that. That would be my answer.
I suppose with us, it's kind of really interesting because we decided that we don't want to have an aesthetic that we are recognized by, you know, in a way that it's not just the aesthetic, and that and because we work with a lot of collaborators and with a lot of residents, the aesthetic, we can't, you know, if we're too dictatorial in controlling the aesthetic, then it's not that collaborative. So they shift and change depending on who we're collaborating with, the context, and the residents or people who we work with. And that fluidity has been our downfall because people sometimes come to us and say, we don't really know what we will ever get with public works, because you will always have a different aesthetic. And I think that's why I was really interested in the aesthetic of the organization, because that might have a continuity. Because if you think about beauty as being something that gives you happiness, pleasure, and hope, then you can have a form of organization that does that and is beautiful. So, and then the other bit of it, so in that vein, we also knew with any social movement, if you don't have transference to the next generation, it will die. And so we also saw that a lot of our students, especially from Royal College of Art, were just going to go into architecture practices which were just so like a CAD monkey, you know, just doing the same thing over and over again. So we opened up public works for them to become directors and generate their own style, their own interest, their own way of generating more work the way they wanted to, in a really kind of commons-based open platform, without us again dictating it as founders. And so that again creates a different aesthetic, because everybody has a different aesthetic. And so it's completely open for everybody to have that. Different, and all the different people like different kinds of projects, so they generate them differently. You know, some are artistic projects because there are members who really want to do art projects, public art projects. There are those, I'm doing more and more research-based projects, so it'll be funded through research. There are others who tender through architectural projects. So it's completely varied, the way that, and it's completely open and dialogic. So if people, the only thing that is not allowed is to do extractive, private kind of market-driven projects. And so it has to be in line with our, ethos, but and with our ethics. But outside that, it's quite open.
All right, many thank you.
The next topic we were really interested in, and maybe it's a question for the both of you again, is the relationship between the process and the product of your art and your work. So I can imagine that in both your cases, it's both, that you are using the process for the product, but the product is something that maybe makes yourself understand your work in art, but maybe you have a focus or yes, thoughts about it.
So I go first again.
Yeah.
Yes, the process is the product, or the product is the process. At least in the product, what you call product, you can see the process, or you just leave the product, the process open. You show how it was made. I mean, there is no lies, if you want. At least in a collage. A collage is also like a prototype. I like also what Torange said about prototyping. From the common good to the public common, how prototyping perhaps is that middle figure between the both of it, isn't it? So perhaps there's something happening similar. At least in collage, you show how you do it, or at least in what interested me, and that is why I talk about the Scotch tape. What I leave this trace there is a trace also for me. Sometimes you became like a detective of your own self when you do this kind of things, of collage, because it's also a prototype of the process of creation in itself. So in that you go and you come, it's like a journey, but you follow your own traces of mysterious things. In this language you cannot find, but images talk.
Yes, in your work, it's really interesting that the product shows, on the one hand, how you, or that you spend time on making it, and that it is a process, but also the topic of your work is time in like a historical way. So that's led us to the question whether it's more about the product or the process, but it's interesting how it connects.
Completely, yes.
Yeah, I think time is probably the important factor here, which Alma talked about as well. Because if you start to think about, rather than process and product, time, then it is a continuum where you can go from the process of production to the object and then back again, and kind of almost have this kind of circular life. And I think for me, as a trained architect, it was just, I always felt uncomfortable with this idea of the absolute product. And the absolute piece of permanent architecture. So I suppose my practice, I always talk about the temporary project and the permanent practitioner, that you are embedded in a place for quite a while, and that takes a lot of emotional investment. But if you're embedded in a place, then there are multiple products that come out of an activist project, I suppose. So you might, the product might be a DIY furniture because you happen to intervene, have a design intervention, which is that at the beginning of a project. And the process of making that DIY might be collaborative, might be individual, or that's that process. Then the next stage might be a poster, the next stage might be a temporary piece of architecture, the next one might be an event, and so on and so forth. So that I think why I quite like the interdisciplinary aspect is that it can be multiple creative cultural products that create for me a commons project, which is shared by many as a kind of common vision and a common view. But that takes a lot of time. If you go into a room and you say, okay, after the day, I'm going to come up with a common vision, it's probably going to be quite a superficial one, because people feel like, oh, I have to come up with a commons project. But if they've had time to go back and think, and it's all about slowness, no, which is what this world is not about, which capitalism is all about speed and growth and competition and so I think the curator Gavin Grindon and Catherine Flood, in the exhibition they did called The Disobedient Object, they talk about direct action as slowing things down. And I think that's really I'm really interested in the idea of the object as a disobedient object.
I think you both mentioned here also the positioner of the artist, of the researcher, of the designer, whatever it is. And maybe just to put an arm in between the questions, and also I would be interested also to know a little bit more about what you said about models of learning and the artistic creation that you both have in your work. How does the artist, designer, or whoever is act as a helper to learn, or to learn through doing? So what is the position of the people doing it, creating?
Well, as I said also at the beginning of my presentation, I learned things that I didn't know, but that I ignored. I mean, that perhaps I know, but that I ignored. That's what you learn also when you are in this creation process, because sometimes hands and eye are more fast than your head, that's your rationalization. So all these are just like exercises to arrive to that kind of lessons or process of knowledge. But it's also by sharing and by the talking also, as Torange said, speaking, when you speak about your work, when you share, you just don't go there with a knowledge you have, but you construct it with others. No? And I think also that metaphor of collage, of appropriating the world, you make it yours, and then you can unlearn things, or things that you didn't know, but you know actually, and we all know. But it is this capacity to be open to that dialogue.
Yeah, and I think also, you know, this, I suppose when it's this process of what Alma's talking about in terms of learning, as you're doing, it's also the process of being surprised, you know, and being curious. And so I don't, you know, I suppose personally, I'm not really interested to go into a situation from an all-knowing person that, you know, I know best. I like to be surprised. I think that's, and I like for people to challenge and to say, well, I don't think that works, or and I think that's where our best work has happened, where I haven't been the sole author. So I always talk about this work which have multiple authorship, and I think that in itself needs a little bit of unpacking, because it's all very nice to say that, but what does that actually mean? You know, what does it mean? What, you know, does that give value to a community? Where, you know, or if it's an art piece, am I the only person that taking the value because I can talk about it and write about it and present it and put it on my website? But what is it bringing to, and that's the ethics of care that is really important in terms of, it's all very well to say multiple authorship, but what does that actually mean for, you know, the Bangladeshi mother that I've worked with? She doesn't care about the artistic output, but she does care to have a job, to, you know, to get out of the house, to do something for you know, whatever that might be. So I think it's also, I think what these processes allow are these dialogues of what we want and what we desire, and being very very honest about the values that they're bringing.
So now we'd like to do more of an individual questions. And I have a question for Alma. And that is, first I want to say that I never really thought of collage had to do with time. I thought it just blew my mind. It's something I've never thought of. It's like you can actually put everything of time within time in a collage. I thought that was really, really an interesting thing. And so now I wanted to ask, for example, in your case, if you wanted to do more of like focus into an urbanism artwork, what elements would you use in a collage and why? Like what type of photos and why? This is more a teeny bit subject.
Thank you, Cecia. If I understand well, because I didn't.
Maybe it was so bad. Can you hear me better now?
Yes. So how would I do collage in urbanism? That was...
Yes, if you were going to put your focus into an urbanism collage, what elements would you use and why?
What elements? I am interested in the question, but I don't know the answer of precisely how to spatialize time from these lessons of temporality that I get from collage, because that's very perhaps personal. As you said, it's very difficult to defend this idea of the time related to collage. Normally it was the space, precisely. space. And I said, no, time. Many temporalities, all that I said in the presentation. But I'm very interested precisely how that can pass to the 3D dimension through the temporalization of space. We've always been to the spatialization of time as a clock. What do you see, the clock? All that Henri Bergson, the great French philosopher, criticizes about our relationship with time is that time has always been spatialized, like linearity, the time is a line, etc., etc. So I would try to use that in urbanism, but I don't know very much how. Perhaps we can discuss it here. How did time is spatializing the urbanism, the urbanist big question? I don't know, that's not an answer. That's another question, sorry.
But yeah, it's something I think we should think about. Thank you.
Thanks to you.
Is there, sorry, is there another question by the students or?
Is Tomasz there?
No? I don't know.
I cannot see Tomasz. We have another question that we asked, that was asked in the dialogues before, but maybe in this case, in connection with creativity, it would be very interesting how the digitalization that we experienced in the last 1.5 years, how it's maybe influenced your work and how you can transport your work to the publicity or to people that you think should think about that topics. Because maybe in the case of a collage or video installation, it's difficult to show this art when it's not in a museum or in a gallery or something.
I mean, I don't know if it's because of COVID or like because of this, but I've kind of become super interested in the blockchain technology, and there is and the fact that actually this digitization of making neighborhoods and doing real estate in the digital context has really, because for years has really excited me, because for years I kept thinking, you're not going to take land speculation out of the cities. I just do not see how that's possible. And if you don't take land speculation out of the city, then you are always going to have the same problems that we have: unaffordable homes, lack of public space, all of those issues that we keep talking about. But actually now, if land investment, which is happening right now, goes into the digital world, where you can buy a piece of land and develop it in the digital world. I mean, most architects now do VR, and virtual reality kind of whatever. And anyway, even if you don't do that, you build buildings, you design buildings in SketchUp or whatever. And so if that's all going into that world, then there is potentially hope. And then I'd be interested to see what happens to our cities as a kind of new imaginary if land speculation is taken out of the real city, and we can then start to really remediate the climate and start to kind of deal with real issues. But with land doesn't, homes don't become land banking anymore, so affordability, I don't know, I just find it as a utopian idea. It might not be what you had in mind, but I find that much more interesting than kind of telling you that I used Zoom for my community engagement things. So
I think that's the direction we thought of too, that maybe digitalization or the situation to be forced to use digital media is not just a problem that you have to do all your meetings in Zoom, but maybe it's an opportunity to think more, just wider.
Yeah, I mean, I do think this blockchain technology is a thing that is going to really revolutionize actually art as well, because there are all these, I haven't really got into it to understand it fully, but this non-fungible tokens, NFTs, where you can embed, you have artworks, and I'm not so much interested, that there are now auction platforms. You don't need the galleries anymore. But what is really exciting about them is that you can, by putting something on those on those auction sites, they kind of, you don't even have to be a programmer. They basically tell you what do you want to embed as rules into your images. And then, so if every time that piece of art is sold, you can have that the original artist can still get royalties, for example, which can never happen. It doesn't happen with the normal gallerist. Once it's gone, and it's the asset of whoever's bought it. But also there was another one, but also I'm really interested to see, whether we can generate money to do community projects through this as a way of generating income. And that, because we constantly do digital things, we might print them then on fabric or whatever, but they are digital. And what does that, how does that, rather than personal gain, how does that kind of enable that to happen? For example, just one more example, because it's a real activist piece. One organization, I think, did not allow this artist to use her work after they had used it for advertising or something like that. So she basically put her artwork, started to put black spray and filmed it and sold that. and that was quite incredible because, you know, they can't really sue her for that. but she still managed to kind of, you know, it was a kind of point that she made. So I do think that's quite an exciting world.
I think what you just mentioned, this little example, shows very well how maybe also in the creation process, you change things all the time and react to what happens to you. And this is, yeah. And what I found very interesting was also what Alma mentioned in her talk about leggere, to choose, which is something that really connects as well to the research practice, as well to the creation practice of art, but also to experimenting. And I wanted to ask you, maybe also from the perspective of educators, how do you introduce to the practice of dealing with the complexity, and how do you introduce this choosing the right things and putting them in the order, which I think happens, well, we all have to deal with it somehow.
It's very difficult, of course, you are all the time questioning about that. But I think it's also the process of accompanying, being there with attention, attentive. I don't know if I can say that in English. Being open, listening, observing, being really there, present to the process. Because also this thing to choose, yes, choose, of course, or not, I don't know. We could just say, what is to choose? How did you choose something? How did you know that you really choose something? What is behind all this chain of decisions that made you to arrive there? Perhaps if you undo all that process, you can arrive to some guides. You're a guide, but you are also learning all the time. That's also the process of the teaching process. So,
I mean, I think if you, I don't know if you know about, you know, the concept of socialization, but it's basically in sociology the concept that from the moment we are born, we are conditioned by everything that surrounds us, and that creates our entire learning environment. So, and that for me was very interesting and important in terms of aesthetic and taste, because to ensure that it's not colonial in teaching, because if I have lots of students from different parts of the world and I'm teaching them modernism, yeah, then already as an Iranian, it's already so messed up. But so I think that kind of notion of informal learning, that every time, you know, I think you have to be quite conscious of who you are teaching, if you like, the content, the environment, and that goes, I mean, I see my teaching environments or platforms as events. And so if you think about events, engagement is an event. Event is not necessarily a full-on performance. It's everything that has experience attached to it is an event. So if you then think about the kind of learning that you're incidentally promoting through that, then that's quite important. So if I am caring in dialogue and listening, then that's part of the learning that then my students learn to also listen and care. But if you are authoritarian, and I say that with despise in architecture education, which is why I left architecture education, which is so authoritarian in terms of, you know, the aesthetic and how the master, and so if you're like that, that's the kind of people you are producing going out there, and I think those things are, and that's the same with what I talk about with organizations. that if you are in a workplace that is promoting hierarchy, patriarchy, non-caring, all of that stuff, you are reproducing that. And I think there are, and I don't mean patriarchy just in terms of men, because there's also a lot of women who replicate patriarchy and then talk about feminism. So I think it's just an attitude. And for me, those informal learning, when I talked about total curriculum, it's that informal learning that is really important to be on top of. So if I design an event, I need to think how I talk, one of my students is developing the idea of a language of care. And I think and again, that has an aesthetic, in my opinion, that could be poetic, if you have language of care. And so I think it's all of those things. It's much more nuanced, informal learning. Yeah.
Thank you. I would also maybe open the questions to the others. And I mean, we are also streaming on YouTube. And so maybe also if some questions appear there to tell Werner. Yeah. Also from the other students from the course, or I don't know if you have some further questions, or even you two in between of you. I don't know if something appeared that you want to address again.
Yeah, just to give the information on YouTube, there is no further questions.
Okay, thank you. Great.
Yeah, thank you again to both of you. I really enjoyed the presentations and also the discussions. Compliments to the students for preparing these nice questions also. I was thinking probably this is very simple and very close to application, but if there is probably a message or we talked so much about learning and even unlearning certain things, if like a message that you could give to us and to the students from your work and approaches for how to develop well, not so much architecture but rather urbanism, considering all these ideas of collage and time and yes, your approaches also about the commons and these ideas, yeah, to both of you. I would be interested.
Sorry, just to clarify, do you mean how it can be implemented? Or...
Yeah, well, that's implemented is very technical already. Yeah. But if there's a message or something that we can consider also as for the teaching, but also for the processes of designing and I mean, there's always these analyzing, getting closer, approaching the environment, and then proposing a project out of this. And because in this process, I see a lot of possibilities to somehow where more creative approaches might be implemented. Yeah, well, used, applied.
Yeah. Something I used to say, and I said also in my presentation, is to let new errors to emerge always. Don't be afraid of the mistake, and I think that's one of the most beautiful lessons I had from my practice. The emerge of new errors.
I mean, for me, it's really in innovation in new forms of practice, because I think that's ultimately, and I say that in terms of organization of a practice, because that's where you could actually do projects through if you have the right environment. If it, I think it's very much part of the logic of the work that you produce is what that form of practice is, and somehow I don't know if you know about Donald Schoen, the reflective practitioner, but I think this notion of, which goes back to what Alma is talking about in terms of errors as well, this notion of reflection and reflection in action while you're doing it. So while you're actually doing these interventions or whatever they might be, and reflection on action, which is post the event. And I think those are really, those have been the key things that have made us operating in London not to get co-opted, because I've had to literally, it's a kind of quite tense because you're in the situation. And if you're working, I've worked with one developer, and when you're working in that situation, you're constantly thinking, you're constantly alert because they could manipulate you like constantly. And then afterwards, afterwards, I've had to do like mappings of power structures or labor structures or labor extraction or whatever, just to be able to understand what I'm doing, and to have a critical practice. And I think that criticality. So a lot of people worry, oh, I just don't work with developers, or I just don't work in London, or I don't. But I think that's not helpful, because that's exactly what those people want you not to do or challenge it. But you can do it, but you have to just be incredibly reflective and agile and interventionist and strategic in those situations. If you don't feel like you want to do that, then yes, don't do it. But I think also, like Alma says, be honest. Sorry, that didn't work, you know. That was a mistake. I won't, you know, I've learned from it, but and I think, again, with professionals, we can't say that we've made mistakes, because the profession doesn't allow you. You're not supposed to, which I think what I've learned from the arts is that you can. Actually, it's actually pretty appreciated if you do. And I think that's where the interdisciplinary thing is so refreshing, because otherwise you continue to do the same things.
Yeah, it's a very nice idea. And I think that is actually like a very good thought also of the self-reflection, like what is actually happening while I do all these actions, while I start relating to the environment. And yes, I think that's also for the students actually, like a nice way, like in the process, like reflecting or considering again the process. And I mean, I don't like term of error or mistake so much, like it was a try and with a different outcome than expected maybe, or like yeah.
Well, I think if you have that way of thinking, then you don't always think, oh, that just didn't work, you know, because that didn't work means that you wanted a certain outcome, and that outcome you wanted didn't happen. Whereas with design intervention, or with intervention in general, or then that's just a test to see what happens. And I think that a lot of people or my students sometimes kind of go, oh, you know, I did that and it didn't work, or I did that and it was really bad. And then you have to say, okay, but why was it really bad, and what was good about it? And so I think that's where this reflective process is productive and empowering, rather than just, oh, it was a disaster, didn't work.
And that has to do also with time, with what Christina was saying, the importance of time, giving you time to the process, not letting you go to this acceleration of time or idea of acceleration of time, and seeing the error, or that we call error, mistake, as an opportunity, of course, of something very interesting. But because you have time and you are patient with yourself also.
Questions for me, like normally, not in this actual situation. No, we try really to connect to the world outside of the university. No, this time it's a bit more challenging. No, and in the master courses, it's always that the students choose their own topic and their own place to work on. No, and we frame some. Let's say this time it's outside of Metropolis. What is like the motto, no? And then let's say we discuss the ideas, no? And then let's say I like very much, that at least the students, if possible, also we go there, and really can speak with people, can also really feel the space, and get a notion of the place and so on. This time everything is really quite, it's really a simulation, that, but so far it's working well, and let's say we are all aware of this, and at some points it also opens maybe new ideas, but we wanted to introduce a new format somehow, especially to connect people, and that's an experiment. We do it next week, and we ask every student to invite one guest for her or his project, be it, let's say, with some connection to the topic and the place, or like from another discipline, or really local people that are engaged or that have certain knowledge or abilities. And well, and we will meet them next Tuesday afternoon, and put them together. And it's the first time we experiment this format, I'm very curious how it could work. And let's say my question, do you have maybe any idea for this afternoon next Tuesday that we could use?
Sounds like a collage.
Absolutely, absolutely.
It's like a symphony.
Yeah. Well, and now the
I would
people
think
we
about-
never met before, so probably we it will be a surprise, everything.
But what kind of people are they? Are they residents or experts or practitioners?
Honestly, it's a broad mix. Yeah, some are, for example, one is really an archaeologist who has digging into this into one area. Well, the difficulty is that it's all different areas as well. So we work on different spaces.
It's not everything in Germany, different parts of Germany, but also near to Stockholm, in Hungary, and in Peru. And
wow.
Yes,
Yeah.
collage is absolutely the right thing.
So yeah, one is archaeologist, and we have also somebody who joins who's quite recent in, let's say, a crafting scene, because it's two students who are interested also in building up like a craft loam wood workshop or something like that, designing something for it. Then we also have, well, they already did some research also with experts, let's say, who are people from the place. For example, some also worked with, questioning, how do you say, well, doing online questionnaires and receiving some responses from them, really from people just living there and experiencing it day by day, depending on where. Then also there was some research into really children at schools, how they experience their environment. Yeah, so it's very various, and many things coming together, and it would be good to have an advice.
Probably difficult,
Yeah. I mean, I think, I don't know, one of the things that I realize in terms of, but that's mainly working with communities, is that there is a little informal terms of engagement, which is at the beginning, so that people don't, and that's usually around care, that there is care in how people communicate and give time, listening, because one of the problems we've had is when there are certain people who dominate the conversation or the platform, and or that if they disagree, they're a bit aggressive, or so it's that I mean, that's the only thing that could things could go wrong, you know, when you start to have that kind of, and so that when we started to do these kind of very basic terms of engagement, and also the other thing, which when you have lots of people from different disciplines and it takes a long time, is that everybody may say the same thing but are using a different language, and then they get irritated with each other, but they're actually saying the same thing. And so, you know, even when we have platforms where we have service designers, for example, and product designers and artists and architects, I mean, there may be actually saying the same thing, but it just all is very different language. And that's another one that I suppose whoever's facilitating needs to just be a bit in tune or alert to that. That's what I think.
Thanks. Absolutely. You know, let's say it's completely experimental, no, since it's not bound to a project or a place. And I think, no, people that said yes to join us, that they expect already a certain confusion, probably, no, since it's university, and I hope, no.
I'm going to talk about something.
Sorry. Yes.
Now I would just say no. Perhaps no.